Hey everyone, Darwin's God here. Last month was the 20th anniversary of the Human Genome Project's mapping out of the human genome. Well, actually, it was the first draft of the human genome, but it was a big accomplishment and we rightly celebrate that milestone. But did you know that at the time there was a debate as to whether that should even be done at all? That's right. The problem was that evolutionists believed that the genome was mostly junk. The vast majority was believed to be junk, so why spend all that time and effort mapping out the human genome? It was precisely evolutionary theory and that expectation of junk that stood in the way of what was one of the greatest achievements of science in recent decades. Now, this concept of junk is very important in evolutionary thought. It didn't just come up in this Human Genome Project. It has a long history and is core to evolutionary theory. So I want to give you that background so you understand what's going on and how important this concept of junk is in evolutionary thought. First, here's a recent commentary on the Human Genome Project and how important it has been. It also talks about this debate. A great debate predated the start of the Human Genome Project. Let's home in on that. A great debate predated the start of the Human Genome Project. Was it worth mapping the vast non-coding regions of genome that were called junk DNA? Aha, there you go. So 2,000 years ago, Aristotle said that teeth, for example, are for chewing food. Now that's just common sense, right? But the idea that things have a purpose, teeth are for chewing food, is a teleological idea, and the Epicureans disagreed with that. Teeth are not for chewing food. Seems a little strange here, but wait, hang in there. Teeth are not for chewing, but rather teeth formed by chance, and because they could chew, they persisted. So they're appealing to chance rather than to design. It's against teleology. So the big question here is why? It seems kind of odd. Why would someone think that teeth are not for chewing, but they randomly formed by chance? Isn't that kind of an odd, heroic idea? Seems unlikely, right? Why would anyone think that? Got to dig down a little bit here. Well, the reason was the faults with the world, the problems with the world. Lucretius, a Roman poet and an Epicurean, wrote this epic poem, De Rerum Natura, and in it he expelled out Epicureanism in great detail and said here that in no wise the nature of all things for us was fashioned by a power divine. The world wasn't created for us, wasn't designed for us. Why? So great the faults it stands encumbered with. Gets to the problem. This is the why. Why did the Epicureans go against teleology? Because of the faults, because of the junk. You see, this concept of junk goes way back to antiquity. So great the faults it stands encumbered with. So this concept of junk, or this observation that the world has faults, the world is a junky world, leads or implies that it arose by chance. This is the sequence in the thinking. Junk leads to chance, or junk implies chance. Here is a kind of a summary statement from Lucretius about this rejection of teleology and teleological thinking. For nothing has been engendered in our body in order that we might be able to use it. It is the fact of its being engendered that creates its use. So there's the flip, the Epicurean flip. Junk leads to chance, and therefore whatever happens to be there just happened to arose, and then it got used. Fast forward to evolutionary thought 2,000 years later or so, and you get the same sort of thinking here. Here's in an 1844 book by Robert Chambers, The Vestiges of the Natural History of Creation. Chambers spells out this same sort of thinking. Now the title of the book kind of says it all here, vestiges. Vestiges means a rudimentary or a leftover, something that is junky. You see the word vestiges, think junky. So he writes, the idea of creationism is totally inadmissible. The single fact of abortive or rudimentary organs condemns it. These terms, abortive or rudimentary, same thing as vestiges, junky. For these, on such a supposition, could be regarded in no other light than as blemishes or blunders. Blemishes or blunders. Okay, more junk. So you see, Chambers views the world as basically a claptrap. So again, he's arguing that chance is a consequence of junk. The world is junky, therefore it must have arisen by chance. 15 years later, Charles Darwin made much the same sort of argument throughout his book on evolution. A lot of observations of disutility, things not working right. Here he writes, "Thus we can hardly believe that the webbed feet of the upland goose or of the frigate bird are of special use to those birds. We may safely inherit these structures to inheritance." So special use here, that's his way of saying it doesn't really work very well. It wasn't designed specifically for these birds. It just happens to be there, and it arose by an evolutionary process involving inheritance and involving chance. Junk leads to chance. John Rice, an evolutionist, has pointed out this link between modern evolutionary thought and Epicureanism of antiquity. Quote, "There is no way to understand the rise of evolutionary theory except in the context of an anti-teleology derived directly from Lucretius." Yes. Now, not surprisingly, this concept of junk has been a core idea in evolutionary thought. Thomas Huxley here was a early supporter of Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. And he wrote in 1871, so this is about 12 years after Darwin's first edition came out, he wrote about teleology and its relationship with evolutionary thought. Quote, "For the teleologist, such as Aristotle, for example, for the teleologist, an organism exists because it was made for the conditions in which it is found. For the Darwinian, an organism exists because, out of the many of its kind, it is the only one which has been able to persist in the conditions in which it is found." Same idea that we saw in Lucretius and the Epicureans. Continuing, quote, "For far from imagining that cats exist in order to catch mice well, Darwinism supposes that cats exist because they catch mice well, mousing being not the end but the condition of their existence." So look at the parallel between Lucretius and Huxley, the parallel between Epicureanism and modern evolutionary thought. Both reject teleology because of the junk in this world. So this is going to continue on after Darwin, after Huxley. I'll just show a couple of quick examples. Here's Professor Joseph LeConte at University of California at Berkeley. He wrote a major book in the late 19th century on evolution and why it had to be true. Here's an example. He says evolution is the only conceivable explanation because if whales were created, is it conceivable that these useless teeth would have been given them? Again, junk leads to chance. More recently, Richard Dawkins wrote this book, The Blind Watchmaker. He also talked a lot about the junkiness of designs. One of his examples was our blind spot. We have a blind spot in our vision system. He writes, "Each vertebrate photocell is in effect wired in backwards." So there's another example of a junky design, and that's the cause of this blind spot. Now, it actually isn't a problem, and he starts to realize that and walks it back. But nonetheless, it is the principle of the thing that would offend any tidy-minded engineer. Even if it works just fine, so what? It's a junky design, period, for Dawkins. The concept of junk is very important in evolutionary thought. Junk implies chance. So back to our article here, let's again look at this quote here. "A great debate predated the start of the Human Genome Project. Was it worth mapping the vast non-coding regions of genomes that were called junk DNA?" So you get an idea of how important this concept of junk is in evolutionary thought. It's been around long before the Human Genome Project, and it is core to evolutionary thinking. Next, we'll look at problems with this whole idea of junk. For now, religion drives science, and it matters.